My name is Benjamin Verbacek, and I'm the lead pastor of Community Evangelical Free Church. I'm also the managing editor for Gospel-Centered Discipleship. And this is Season 3, Episode 1 of what we call the Writer's Coaching Corner, where I get in front of a camera and we talk about one paragraph from one article that appeared on our website last month, and what was working really well from a writing standpoint, and how do we do that same thing in our own writing. And so I'm coming from my house here. You can see a fireplace by me. We got stockings. It's Christmas time. Normally I'm filming these in the church basement. However, we planted a church, we hired a pastor, and I help coach cross country. And every minute I'm in our church building, I find myself working on church stuff, which kind of sort of should be the case, but I can't even find a little time to film these. So I'm doing this at the house in the hope that maybe I can be more consistent. Anyway, you don't probably care about all those details, but I want to tell you about the thing that you probably do care about, which is the writing principle we're going to talk about this month, which is this. Good writing prefers the concrete over the general, and especially in applications. So concrete over the general, especially in applications. And so the article we're going to talk about was actually from October, so it's a month ago, but it's from Chris Jones, one of our staff writers, and he wrote an article called "The Local Church Helps Rid Me of Morbid Introspection." And Chris is one of our staff writers and is involved in pastoral ministry, and helpful article here. And here's the paragraph I want to zero in on, along with another one later in the article. But he writes, "During some of my worst moments of deep introspection, Satan has fired darts at my mind to make me question my salvation and usefulness in my home and local church. This has made me want to give up writing, quit music, stop preaching, and never dream of pastoring in the local church. I can sometimes feel completely hopeless, all because I'm stuck in an inward rut that I can't pull myself out of." And he talks about the way the local church and its diversity of people and experiences and giftings and weeping with those who weep and rejoicing with those who rejoice, like that. All of that helps pull Chris out of his introspection. And later in the article, so while that was very particular, very concrete to him, I mean, even quit music and writing and preaching, this cluster of things is very particular to who he is. And yet later in the article, as we behold Christ, he says, that helps lift us out of that. He speaks of carrying the burdens of others. And where's the paragraph I want? Okay. Yes, right here. He writes of a young mother who is struggling because she can't get enough sleep caring for her newborn. And then she says, or consider an elderly saint and who's maybe struggling in the way a younger saint might be able to come along and encourage them in different ways. And so what I'm trying to highlight is these are very particular things, but they do the work that a writer should do so that the reader doesn't have to do the work that they can't do or won't do very easily on their own or on our own, which is to bring this very specific thing into a very concrete experience. And it's funny the way this works. Like, the generic really doesn't speak to us, but even if I'm not an elderly saint or a mom with a newborn, those ideas do help me think about very concrete ways that the principle does apply to me. And so what was interesting, kind of to draw the curtain back, as Vicky, one of our editors, was editing this for Chris, she said, "Hey, you're using some repetition here in this paragraph. Maybe you could vary the phrasing." And Chris writes back in the comments, "That's the preacher in me, that uses the same phrasing, which is really helpful in preaching, maybe less helpful in writing." And whether that's really something he should be concerned about or not in that paragraph, I don't know. I thought it was good feedback from the editor. But there's a part of Chris's preaching impulse that really is honed, I think, to press move from the abstract and the general to the very concrete. And I think that works really well for his writing and for our own writing. And I want to talk just for a minute about that idea of I'll call it the Goldilocks version of how much we talk about ourselves. So Chris mentions himself to get it very concrete. That's really the fastest way to be concrete, is to talk about yourself. There was a time, I think of like John Owen and the Puritans. It's said of him that he had 11 kids. They all died, and he never wrote about that. Now, I've not read all of John Owen's words to say he never wrote about it, but that's what I hear is true. Now, maybe it was too personal for him to ever write about, but he was a guy who wrote like bookshelves of words, and to never write about something so personal, that feels strange to me. But I think, and maybe even unhealthy, but I think that was part of the era. Similar things have said with Edwards, who was a couple hundred years later in a different country, but that Puritan-esque like idea of not writing about yourself very much, that's a part of that. I think in our own day we've swung way the other way, where it's so self-referential and everything's about I. But somewhere there in Scripture we even see a good balance of this. Paul is talking about others, but he's not afraid to apply the gospel to himself. He describes himself as the chief of sinners, or it's in the third person, but he speaks of being caught up in the third heavens. I know a person. He's trying to distance himself from him, but that's him. And he's talking about himself. He says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So, I don't know how exactly you work this out in your own writing, but I would just encourage you that one way to get to the very concrete is to apply the truths to your own life, and then to think about how they might apply to others around you, which, Chris writing here did so well. 2 other examples. This was from an article this summer, 13 pieces of unconventional preaching advice. And this seems to be going to be one of the most shared articles we had all of last year. And number 5, he writes, if you try to preach to everyone, you end up preaching to no one. If you try to preach to someone, you end up preaching to everyone. And he goes on to explain that in a really helpful way. I'll leave that to you to look at. If you've been around the book proposal world, tried to write one yourself, or heard about what it means to write one, kind of this piece of advice that floats around is a book for everyone is a book for no one. And it's that idea that you really have to hone the audience so that you actually communicate things. Because if you're just generically speaking to everybody, readers have a hard time bringing that truth close. One more resource, this is an interview that Timarie Friesen did with Hannah Anderson. It's titled What to Reveal for Authentic Storytelling. And it's all about the subject of how much do you share about yourself or your kids or whatever that would be. And I think Hannah Anderson's thought about that quite a bit and offers some good advice on when to speak of others, when to speak of yourself, when not to speak about yourself. So I submit that to you as a resource. One other resource that I'm just sharing just for fun, I am working through it right now. You can see here's my bookmark in it. Not quite done, but I'm loving it. I love Roy Peter Clark. And this is a book called Murder Your Darlings. That's a phrase that floats around writing circles. And it comes from a very particular author from a few hundred years ago. And the subtitle is, And Other Gentle Writing Advice from Aristotle to Zinsser. William Zinsser being a modern writing coach who is... his book, on writing well, is very popular. But anyway, this is a helpful book. He takes about 4 or 5 pages to go through these kind of masters, so to speak, of people who have written not just words, but written words about words, how to communicate them. And so that's what the whole book is about. I'm loving it, and commend it to you as a good resource. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next month.